Welcome to Real Squawk, episode 5. I'm Lisa Bolstad, and I'm here with Jason Crean and Jordan Daniel. Tiffany Park is taking the evening off. And tonight we're going to be talking about enrichment.
So we get lots of questions about enrichment, like lots of questions about enrichment. And I think it's because people tend to anthropomorphize and think birds need what humans do. And so we thought this would be a really good episode to kind of touch base on what enrichment actually is. So Lisa, you added this, right?
Yeah, so what is enrichment and why is it important? Enrichment is the addition of stimulating activities to an animal's environment. Birds in the wild would spend hours foraging for food, avoiding predators, raising babies, flying, climbing, bathing, socializing, and a variety of other activities. So it's important that we provide stimulation for the birds that we keep as well.
So what all of that means is that they're working to survive in the wild. The wild is a really rough place. I'm speaking as a biologist here. It is not this lush paradise where birds can do whatever they want. They're constantly watching for predators and looking for food and things like that. So we need to keep in mind that birds in our homes or in managed situations like zoos and institutions like that, we have the ability to get them to thrive because we can provide so much more for them, and we're protecting them from the elements, I guess you could say.
So consequences of a dull environment, there's many, but some of them include feather destructive behavior, chronic repetitive behaviors, which would include pacing, circling the cage, twitching, screaming, fear, self-mutilation, and then of course weight gain and other undesirable physical conditions.
Lisa, I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So because you're involved in parrot welfare and you've seen birds in these conditions, or even acquired birds in these conditions, I'm assuming they have, toys and stuff like that in their cage, a bunch of plastic toys and stuff like that, but these birds still end up looking this way, or even mutilating themselves, or they just seem overall frustrated. Basically, does that kind of, if that doesn't, I guess what I'm trying to say is that doesn't prove the notion that, toys are the answer as a form of enrichment. Do you do you agree with that in a way?
I think that it depends on the situation. It depends on the species. It depends on the particular bird. You're right. Sometimes birds have a great environment, have great owners, have everything they need, and they still feather pick. So no, it's not a blanket reason. But a lot of times when we get birds in, probably one of the most common things is you have a bird in a small cage, wooden dowel, no enrichment whatsoever. Then you ask the person, well, do they have toys that came with them or other perches? And they say, well, no, because the bird just chews them up. So we quit buying them. So,
yeah.
They need something to do, whether it's
right
in pet homes that they're usually not, they don't have a mate. They're not raising babies. They need to something, if they're in a cage all day and they're not out while people are at work, they need something to do.
Right.
So I think it's different when they're in a breeding situation. I think people don't understand that. They'll see a breeding setup and then automatically think, well, where's all the plastic toys?
Yeah.
Whereas they don't realize that birds in a breeding situation have a mate, they have fresh air, there's misting systems. They don't see all the bottle brush that got put in there in the morning.
Yeah.
They're not
That's
raising.
now gone.
Yeah, they're raising babies. They have stuff that they're doing.
Right.
That's enrichment too. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll talk about those different types of enrichment as well. But that's a great question, Jordan, because, you know, I think we're a victim of our own environments, right? We see, you know, we have a very narrow view of what's going on.
Right.
If we just have a pet at home, or just have a few pets, or have had the same type of bird, for example, our whole lives, where, you know, I've traveled the country, actually internationally, and I've seen breeder setups that every pet would dream of. But there's this negative connotation to breeding setups. And I'm like, the very best welfare I have ever seen is breeding setups, large spacious cages and aviaries.
Right.
They get to be rained on, which birds love. Like, people are like, oh, that's so cruel. I'm like, no, they love it. They're all, well, Jordan knows, I mean, you've got birds out there that just love water. So, you know, to have protection from the elements, but also the choice, which is really what enrichment is about, is choice, right? It's about doing what birds do as birds, not as people, but as birds.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to hit on a lot of this, but that's a great question, because
Yeah,
toys aren't always the answer.
Exactly. In my experience, I've seen pet birds with cages that are just filled with stuff, and as you said, people have that, you know, negative connotation. Well, if there's nothing in the cage, then they think that they're not providing anything for the bird. Yet, you know, you can put the smallest little toy in there, and the bird may or may not entertain itself with it. You know, it just depends on what it, I guess it's the effort that matters, you know, and changing things out, and kind of trying to just constantly stimulate the bird, rather than I'm going to buy 5 or 10 toys and put them in a cage and call it a day, you know.
And that happens. I mean, I have seen rescue situations where you have cages full of the same old wooden toy that's been in there for 10 years that the bird has never paid any attention to at all. So there's a toy in the cage, but it's not doing anything.
Right. Yep, all good points.
So here are just some different kinds of enrichment that I threw up. There's raising babies, having friends, natural branches to forage in, being outside, you know, buckets with things for them to forage through for pets. One of the things I think that a lot of people don't realize, or it's not even that they don't realize, I guess they don't pay attention with breeding setups, is typically an outdoor breeding cage is huge compared to what an indoor pet cage would be. So you need to take into consideration all the flying and activity that they're able to do as well, which I know both of you with your outdoor setups are nice and roomy. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure breeders look at some pet cages and go, wow, that's tiny.
Yeah.
I've actually seen some really big pet cages, you know, but of course, people only have so much space in their home. So, you know.
And if they're getting out, that makes a difference too. I mean, are you opening the cage door and are they going around? But it shouldn't be discounted that a lot of breeder setups are, you know, 10, 20, 30-foot flights too, where birds are flying around and have lots of room to do things and see things outside.
And I actually just got done yesterday moving a couple pairs around, because I just they not only have I not gotten any eggs in a year or almost 2 years, but I just felt that they were not comfortable. Something was telling me that they were not comfortable where they were. You know, they didn't feel secure. Granted, you know, they bounce around, they look happy and everything like that, but moving, especially for breeders, moving pairs around to different locations in the yard or wherever, however your setup may be, that keeps them from getting bored too, because then they check out a new space, they're next to new neighbors, they're kind of, you know, getting acquainted. So yeah, it keeps them from getting bored that way too.
Yeah, and pet homes, sometimes we switch stuff around to have the opposite effect. Sometimes if
Mhm.
you switch them around, all of a sudden they're not as nesty as they were.
Mhm.
So, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
just because things are different.
Yeah, exactly. It might even stimulate for breeding birds, it can stimulate them to breed. So
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why I moved them. Aside from the fact that I felt like they didn't feel secure where they were.
So that first picture is a Sierra parakeet, and this is my first season breeding them. They're rare in the States. There's not many people that have them, and all 4 of my pairs that are unrelated have fertile eggs. And
I know, I saw
watching
that.
them,
That's awesome.
it's amazing. I'm super excited. They're outside year round. They're acclimated. They're from a higher elevation anyway, so they tend to do pretty well in a wide variety of environments. But they're just really interesting birds to watch. And
Mhm.
I grow bamboo for the birds to destroy. And I've got like 30, 40 feet bamboo out there. So it's always growing. And I throw that in with them and they just destroy it. These little birds
Yeah.
just kicking things off. And I also get eucalyptus shipped in from California. I know that, Jordan, I know you've used it before.
Mhm.
And that's a big favorite with a lot of the birds too. But they spend their day sitting on their eggs, and the male just sitting outside the nest box patrolling, just watching things. Like, that's their enrichment. They're so driven.
Mhm.
And this is something that's difficult for people, I think, to understand, is biologically, like, the biological imperative is for organisms to pass on their genes. That is what
Mhm.
all of them are driven to do, whether it's a plant, a fungus, a bird, a mammal, whatever it is. That's what they want to do. And so really the ultimate in enrichment and welfare is to allow them to do that. So when we can do that, and we're not saying you should allow your pets to do that, but
Mhm.
it is great welfare for them to be birds.
Right.
And we're going to be joined by a special guest who I'm about to let
Excellent.
in.
Yay!
And here she comes. Slowly but surely. The Queen of Enrichment has joined us.
All right.
Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you see us?
I can see your shares, your types of enrichment screen.
Okay.
Good.
So we were just talking about the different types of enrichment, but Robin, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your experience with this topic?
So I'm really old, but and I've been doing it for a long time. I own a company called the Leather Elves, and I started out doing parrot toys, and then started working consulting, doing enrichment programs with zoos and facilities that had big collections. And over the years, I've sat on the board of International Association of Avian Trainers and Educators. I was their president. And enrichment for me is just, I really enjoy it. I'm passionate about it because it empowers the animals that we work with. So that's the on-the-spot bio.
Robin, I have a box of toys here sitting at my feet that I just ordered from you.
Well, I have to tell you, you were probably the last shipment that went out before we moved today to our new location. So,
Yeah. And we appreciate Robin being on because you closed on a house today, right?
I did, and
Yeah.
I was
So
outside and I was carrying boxes, and Mark, my husband, said to me, "So were you doing that thing with Jason and Lee?" And I was like, "Oh, yes, I was."
well, we appreciate you. Yeah, we appreciate you being here because you're really an expert in this area. I use your toys too. Your birchwood toys, my black palm loves, and they actually last, which is saying something. So yeah, we definitely appreciate it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you. So I'm not sure where you're at in your discussion.
So we were just talking about how breeding birds don't necessarily need as much introduced enrichment because they're breeding and they have a mate and things like that. And now we're starting to talk about different types of enrichment. You know, the pictures here are just kind of like examples of what we're using to kind of drive our discussion.
Well, one of the things I know we've talked about, Jason, is that by definition, enrichment is enhancing the quality of life of our animals.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be the, you know, I'm gonna slit my own throat here. It doesn't have to be that commercial enrichment that you buy. It can be, you know, I break it down in categories. And so it can be visual, it can be auditory, it can be olfactory. There are just so many different things. And with breeder birds, it's really about looking at the situation at the time of year, at the time of, you know, season it is, and creating enrichment that fits those needs, what they would be doing if they weren't in human care.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I mean, knowing their natural history, which is what they like, their lifestyle in the wild, what would they be doing in the wild, is important. You know, we give our toucans and our arasaris palm logs because they won't nest in anything else, but they need those palm logs to excavate. Like they dig out, they kind of, well, what you and Mark are going to be doing, Robin, setting up new homes, right? So they need to excavate that log because that reinforces their bond. And, you know, that's enrichment to them. That's what they like to do because that's what they've evolved to do. It's biologically appropriate enrichment.
You know, I think too, so years ago, I worked with some breeders, different types of facilities, you know, large, small, you know, very regimented. Some were very regimented, some were not. And what we really tried to figure out was, do breeder birds benefit from enrichment? And the answer was absolutely yes.
Yep.
But it's that you talk about that, what they'd be doing in the wild and what they do naturally. And I think that's so important in any kind of enrichment you're going to do, but in particular for breeder birds. It's, you know, we look at enrichment, and when we've got animals in our collections, we think, oh, I've got to enrich them all the time. I've got to, you know, they've got to have something, they've got to be doing something all the time. And if you look at the energy or the activity budget of a bird in the wild, it's not spent in constant motion. It's not spent, you know, always doing something. And I think that's something that we don't always consider when they're in human care.
Yeah, and we talked about briefly they spend their time surviving, right, in the wild, like, you know, protecting themselves, which they don't have to do in our homes or in a zoo or wherever they are. And so, you know, giving them enrichment so that they can do things when they want to do things, you know, and like you said, that idea of choice is really important.
You know, I think in any animal welfare, we are looking at choice. We're looking at, so if you've got, it doesn't matter if they're breeder birds or not. If you've got birds that you need to offer them those choices. If they choose not to interact with what you've offered, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe, you know, a week from now. If it's not something that's going to attract, you know, bacteria or, you know, pathogens, then it's okay to leave it there for a while and just kind of see what they do. I mean, that's the cool part, is trying to figure out, you may have an idea. and you put something in an enclosure and you're like, okay, I know how they're going to use this. And then they use it completely differently. And so it's that conversation, that back and forth, and that learning that we do when we're caring for these birds that's so important.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yeah, like the Nicobar pigeon in the upper right corner here, that's in my big 800 square foot planted aviary, and you know, I give them those rubber dog balls, but they're hollow inside, and you just stuff it with vegetation and let them kick it around. But you know, they spend a lot of time on the ground, so their enrichment should be, you know, where they're at. And I know, you know, Jordan has, is it okay if I advance to the next slide?
Yeah.
Jordan is the king of this. I could watch videos of his lorries rolling around with all this vegetation he throws in there all day long. But go ahead, Jordan, and talk about this, because this is awesome.
So there's plenty of safe flowers and foliage that you can, not just pertaining to lorries, but just any bird or, you know, citizen. So I like to, and I have given these listed here to my birds: eucalyptus, bottlebrush, crepe myrtle, dandelion, calendula, palm shoots. They especially love the palm shoots. Roses, magnolia, dogwood, and gardenias. You know, with lorries, they're not a hard bird to necessarily entertain. They're birds that absolutely love water. They love to be, you know, I go out there every day, and whether they want to bathe or not, I hose down everything. You know, lorries, they have projectile dropping, so I do it every day, twice a day. And some will engage in bathing, some will not. I don't offer foliage every day. If anything, it's maybe twice a week, because otherwise I'd have no more trees or or any vegetation in my yard. So and since I've moved from California to Texas, I don't have bottlebrush or eucalyptus anymore, you know, to have easy access to. But I do still manage to implement them somehow, whether I have to buy it online or, you know, grab something I see at a Walmart parking lot or something like that. So they again, they're not hard birds to entertain, and whether they engage in any of it or not, at least I know that I'm offering it to them. And I think that that's what really matters. You know, you absolutely do not have to implement it every day. It's just at your, I don't want to say your convenience, but however easy it is for you to do so, or budget wise, I think absolutely implementing it is important. But if you can't do it every day, you shouldn't, you know, panic over it or think that, oh my gosh, my bird's going to start plucking or get bored. No, there's absolutely other ways of of enriching their lives, which is exactly why we're talking about this stuff. So these are all actually my pictures. I will even do it, implement different types of fruits in their nectar diet. Their nectar is the staple diet, and they get it every day. But to kind of spice things up, I do add more stuff that they can chew on, they can twirl around in their mouths, and just to have fun with it.
Yeah, edible flowers are a huge favorite here. But lorries especially, you're looking at their natural history, what they do in the wild, right? They're nectarivores. Right. And, you know, they eat pollen, which is why they've got that little brush on the end of their tongue, those protruding taste buds. And you're capitalizing on that, which is fantastic. But lots of birds can benefit from this type of enrichment. I mean, all parrots can benefit from browse like this, you know, edible flowers and things like that. And dandelion, the whole plant, root all the way to the flower, all of it is edible, all of it has benefits. So there's lots to say about offering that.
Yeah, well, and there, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Jordan, I think you bring up a really good point, that it doesn't have to be every single day, because then it loses its novelty. And I think
Right.
when you give these flowers and you give this foliage, people, you know, that you get this wonderful response. And then
Mhm.
it's just kind of human nature to say, oh, I'm going to do it every day because they love it. And then you end up with, meh, I don't know that I really, you know, your birds are like, oh, we just had that yesterday. So yeah.
It's very coincidental that you say that, because I was just going to state something similar, that because I do not do it every day, they know when I'm picking stuff for them. They know when I've got a handful of stuff, bringing it out to the yard, and they all sound off. They're going crazy. They're bouncing around because they know they're going to get it, you know. And God forbid I do not put one in somebody's cage, because they will let me know, hey, where's mine, you know. So very good point.
And I think enrichment is also like not being regular and predictable.
Mhm.
I think that keeping birds used to change, accustomed to change, is probably the healthiest thing we could possibly do. I hear from a lot of people all the time, like, my bird freaks out, or, you know, I can't do this, or my bird won't touch this or won't eat this. And that's because we haven't done a good job at getting them accustomed to change. Their
Mhm.
lives are all about change in the wild. They have
Right.
one day they've got a harpy eagle chasing them around. The next day there's a snake in the tree where they have to move. The next, you know, this tree that blooms every 3 years is blooming all of a sudden, and they're going to go gorge on that, you know, for a few days. So like, we need to keep them used to change, because that keeps their minds working. And I don't want my
Right.
birds, like sitting and waiting, knowing. I want to keep their minds and bodies guessing
Yeah.
as to what comes that day, because they're just going to be better adjusted if that's the case. That goes
It's
for all
funny.
birds.
Yeah. It's funny because, like I said, I can be carrying, you know, or hauling branches out to the yard, or I can be carrying a 2x4, and they're freaked out over the 2x4. It's a piece of wood, but they're not freaked out over the branches, you
Yeah.
know. But if I leave that 2x4 on the floor, you know, where they can all see it, you know, they calm down. So
Mhm.
there's ways to get around that.
Yep.
Well, and I think when you look at, you know, we talked so much about what they do in the wild, and it's moment by moment choices that need to be made. And, you know, like Jason was saying, there's a harpy eagle one day. What am I, you know, I'm not going to be hanging out looking for my flowers that day. So it's really about, and the schedule. I think, you know, I'm a big proponent of schedule, but it's random schedule, if that makes any sense. That it's, you know, it's more for you, that, okay, I remember I need to do this, this, and this. I want to do, you know, this type of enrichment today. But it doesn't always have to be on Tuesdays, I'm going to do dandelion on Thursday, because it's not even close to what they would be experiencing in the wild.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think having certain days where, you know, I mean, lots of people have more time on the weekends where they can spend the weekends, you know, adjusting their enrichment, because they're just too busy during the week. But it doesn't have to be, you know, crazy. I'll gather branches in bamboo and I'll stick them in a bucket of water so that I can easily access them before I start work every day, Monday through Friday. You know, so you can definitely prep those types of things in advance, and keep them going for the week. But like you said, there you are.
There's her pretty face.
Yeah,
I was looking at the flowers. I was just enjoying the flowers and stuff on Jordan on the screen. So
it's enriching, right? It's enriching. But yeah, and any of these plants, you know, if you're growing them, especially, you know, I'm in Florida. I have to grow dandelion and chicory, which is Italian dandelion, because it doesn't grow everywhere like it did in Chicago, where I could just pick it out of my lawn every day. But the birds love the chicory. Like, go on Amazon, get some chicory seeds, throw them in a bed, throw them in a pot, and grow them. They love bitter greens. They love them. And so, and they're simple to grow. So, you know, when you're growing these things yourself and you know where you're growing them, and you know, they're not full of chemicals and things like that. Obviously, we want to avoid that. But even a rose bush, like any roses, are safe. And the petals, they love the petals. So, keep that in mind when you're looking around and asking your friends, hey, I'm looking for this list of safe plants. Anybody growing them? And then you'll have some. I used to get curly willow from a friend of mine. Curly willow. What is that called? There's another name for it. Is it corkscrew willow? But it's a willow tree, but it grows like the branches are all curvy, and the birds loved it. They absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
So, I know somebody was just complaining that someone was proponent of adding eucalyptus to cages, and they're like, eucalyptus is poisonous. And there was a whole group of people on from Australia on the group, like, they literally destroy the eucalyptus here every day.
I saw that. I don't remember where it was either, but I remember
it might have been on my group. Yeah,
it might have been.
It might have been on my group, but
yeah.
They're like, yeah, no, eucalyptus is like, very popular here with the birds.
I don't even know where that even generated from, that rumor.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of rumors when it comes to live plant enrichment and browse. And Robin, she's heard it all. I know, just like I have, but just because a plant has some kind of toxin in it just means that a lot of animals will exploit it to a certain point, and then they'll move on to a different plant. And, I mean, giraffes do that. Giraffes eat a whole bunch of monkeys in the South American rainforest. They'll gut load themselves on this one type of plant. And then when their bodies can't handle it anymore, they sit and digest for a while or detox and move on to the next one. So, I think, and parts of plants can be toxic without the rest of the plant. Like you shouldn't be feeding tomato leaves, right? Tomatoes are nightshades, but that doesn't mean that the tomato's not safe. The tomato's completely safe for birds and nutritious, right? I mean, it's totally nutritious. And citrus fruits, same thing. Citrus fruits are great for birds, but people hear this citric acid and they think acid and it's bad. Peaches and nectarines are more acidic than citrus fruits. So citrus is fine.
And when you're using all these different new types of plants and types of fruits and things, it's not about you want to present them as whole as you possibly can, so that it's not, there's nobody out in the wild kind of picking things off and only, that's a good leaf and that's not. And that's part of the enrichment itself, is that your bird has to work for it. Your birds need to kind of go through it. And, especially if you've got, breeding pairs, they need to be busy doing things. It's okay. I've got this. I'm going to go through these. I'm going to pick what's best. And it's not really up to us. It's up to the birds. And that's, again, that natural behavior that we need to allow them to do.
Right.
Yeah, I just jumped ahead to the foraging piece because that's what you're discussing. And you're so right. Like the more whole the food we can give them, the better. My toucans, if I gave them like whole food, it would be all over the place because they grab pieces, they shake their head, it goes everywhere. So I cube the food for them so that they can, toss it back like blueberry size. Like I give them whole blueberries and everything else is about that size. But foraging for the toucans and aracarias, like you see here in this PVC elbow that Chyla at Wacky Wings / Royal Avian, I think they've merged completely now, royalavian.com and Wacky Wings toys. But they, like these PVC elbows, last forever and they're amazing. They're amazing. You can throw anything in there and the birds will. But this is what they do, right? They go into these little tree hollows and things like that, and they pick out bugs and all these different things. So definitely ways to incorporate whole food, just like the eclectus pictured here. And I wish I could remember where I got this picture, but I have birds that wouldn't touch diced fruit or diced veggies, but as soon as I put it on a skewer in its whole form, like Sirius, my black palm, loves whole Brussels sprouts, loves them, loves whole kumquats that grow on the tree out in front. So giving them these whole pieces just is more enriching and it keeps them busy longer.
We have a 30-year-old Panama Amazon that came into us a couple months ago. He's the one I was telling you guys came in on seed and sugar puffs and
Oh,
Ritz
yeah.
Ritz crackers. And that's what he'd been eating for 30 years. And he didn't know what any of this stuff was. And our foster lady, she tried everything. And then finally she's like, oh, the heck with it. So she shoved a bunch of stuff on one of those skewers. Sure enough, he started eating them. And now he's eating, you know, chopped stuff in his bowl. It took a little bit, but the skewers were great.
Mm-hmm.
It was just enough to get him to start playing with it.
Skewers are sometimes tough to come by. I know as a manufacturer, we use a lot of them in our toys just as a base, and it's getting a little bit difficult to get them, but you can put them on a branch. You can put things on a branch and just place it around in the aviary. And it's not, all of this, we get stuck on, oh, it's got to be, professional. It's got to look good. It's got to do, it doesn't. I mean, again, nobody's out there arranging things to make them look pretty. Nobody's cutting it, I remember working with a woman one time and she wanted to make little faces out of the food. Okay, if that makes you happy. And it's not about how it looks to us. And when you think about, I'm going to go back to nature again, things are hanging on branches, they're hanging. And when you talk about skewers, I like to put a skewer so it's not super easily accessible. So it's not hanging, oh, I'm standing on this perch and now I can reach the skewer. So there's got to be a little bit more work. So you build up some body condition if they've got to hang maybe to get it, or if it's just a little bit further out of their reach, and it gets them, doing some of that exercise that might not be happening.
Well, in exercise, people often think the only exercise that's beneficial for birds is flight. And that's not what birds do most of their activity budget. Most of their activity budget is climbing and hanging and things like that. And the research on birds and flight has shown us that birds will do and go to any length to not fly. They will climb and they will only use their wings until a certain degree. They've tested this on many different birds where they do these inclines, and they realize that the birds don't use their wings until I think 60 degrees, a 60-degree angle is when they start using their wings. But like they don't want to, their main way to locomote is climbing, using their feet, because it's less energy. They don't want to expend all that energy on flight. So not that flight isn't beneficial, but birds don't need the amount of flight time that people think they need. And that's definitely something to consider. Get them, and I agree, I put skewers in the middle of the cage so that the birds have to hang upside down next to them to get to the food, or pull it over to a perch with one arm, one leg and grab it and things like that. I want them to work for their food, and that is not cruel. That is hugely beneficial.
No, and then in the wild, when they're climbing through brush and the canopies and stuff like that, they're not easily exposed like they would be in flight.
Exactly.
I mean, when you talk about activity budgets, I like to think about a cheetah. So the cheetah is not just running around all day, in search of food. It's stalking. And then it's a quick burst, and it's taken care of. And for our birds, why spend all that time when you could hang and move around and just have what you need in pretty close vicinity? Maybe you're going to go from one location to another over the course of a day or a couple of locations, but it's really, hey, there's this really cool tree that has all this readily accessible food right today. This is where we're going to be.
Yep. And Jordan, this upper picture is what you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah. So this is just some apple, and there's some pear in there that I mixed up into the nectar. Again, this is just, I don't do this every day. This is just to spice things up for them and, let them have fun while they're eating. And I'm pretty sure in a future episode or slide or anything like that, I'm going to be talking about my new nectar formula. And in one of the formulas, there is more added enrichment items. You have stems, you have leaves, dried leaves, you have flowers, you do have fruit bits in there. And you know, it's there if they want it. And if they don't eat it, at least, you know, you're offering, you know, something more.
Or fishing around through it, right? Or moving things around.
Yeah.
That study that we had cited before at the University of Guelph, where they talked about why whole food is important. And when you look at the top pictures, birds have to manipulate each individual thing differently with their beak, right? So that's so important, because if they pick up a leaf, like those round leaves are nasturtium leaves that I grow here and the flowers next to them are nasturtium flowers. Like when they pick those up, there's different colors, there's different textures, there's different tastes. They're manipulating them differently. They need their foot to hold them sometimes. Sometimes they just need to graze. But they're even if they don't eat 100% of the items there, they're still having to use their mind to manipulate all these different things. And that's really, really important. Having all your food as one shape and texture and size and taste is incredibly boring. So like the more enrichment that you can give them and the more foraging opportunities, the better.
Yeah, you might clog your sink later, but at the end of the day, it's the effort that matters.
The garbage disposal is the best thing ever created for a bird owner.
Right.
Tell that to my husband when I've clogged up the drain and he has to undo the pipe underneath to get all the crap out of there that I've just tried to grind up.
Exactly. That was the first thing I installed in the bird room here when I bought the house in Florida, was a nice the biggest industrial strength garbage disposal I could find. So training obviously is a form of enrichment, and we've seen lots and lots of work done over the years with training birds. This is Laura Joseph, who I've worked with, and I've misspelled her web address at the bottom. I apologize, but it's theanimalbehaviorcenter.com. But she offers online social media based training and enrichment type stuff. So she's definitely a resource that you can use. And then this is Elise, who I've worked with over the years. Target training Iggy, who is one of my birds. That's a blue-throated macaw. And we were actually training him to be on a temporary exhibit at the Chicago Nature Museum. This is Celeste Troon, who is the lead biologist there. And so Iggy here is in heaven because he's with two women and he just loves women. Doesn't really care for me all that much, but that's okay. And target training is a great form of enrichment because it gets birds exercising and you know, moving the different parts of their bodies. I teach a zoo biology course at the university, and all my students, as part of their work, have to do a training video where they're target training something. I've had them target train turtles. I've had them target train fish. Birds are easy to target train. So, but it's definitely something where you can just pull out that target at any time, and that will really come in handy at some point.
And you know, the nice thing about that is too, for birds that may not be used to enrichment, may not be used to that contact, it doesn't have to be hands-on. I love target training for that reason, because you can move birds with it. You can, with completely hands-off, you can introduce them. You can try to move them a little bit closer to something that, you know, may not be their favorite thing. And it's just such a useful piece of training. And I think that it doesn't have to be where you start. You can, you know, go back if you skipped over that one, go back to target training, because at some point in your life with birds, it's going to come in handy.
Yep. if every animal you have is target trained, it makes life so much easier. So definitely consider positive reinforcement training or learning from a positive reinforcement trainer. I work with Laura Joseph pretty closely. She's just a great resource. So definitely worth checking out. And obviously we've talked a lot about toys already, but Robin is definitely a resource at the what's your website again?
It's the Leather Elves .equid.com. And if you just go to our Facebook page, the Leather Elves Facebook page, we do a live stream every Friday night. And we have trainers, we have conservationists, we have some of you might be there at some point in the near future. And so it's just a conversation. It's a fun back and forth every Friday night. And then we do sell the toys from our Facebook page. Been making toys for over 25 years now, and it's always evolving. And I think that's what enrichment has to do. You can stick with one thing, but like I said, they're going to get bored with it. And so you work in different things, you try new things, and learn from your animals, not just for any animals you've got in your life. Learn from them, see what works, and modify if you have to. And it doesn't have to be, okay, this didn't work, I'm going to scrap the whole thing. Maybe it's just a little tiny tweak that needs to happen. So.
Yep.
I wish that I'd had, I pulled old photos off my phone. I wish I would have had a couple photos of your stuff, Robin, because they really are huge favorites here, especially the birch stuff. Like Jason said, they just love pulling that birch from around the outside of the slices.
Yeah,
well,
they love the birch.
Mm-hmm.
We use that because we came upon that because it's got the different textures. You know, it's got almost 3 layers. It's got that kind of paper layer on the outside, then what I call like a cork layer, and then the wood itself. And you know, there are a lot of birds that will just peel the paper off and be done. You know, or maybe they work through that really quickly, and then it's the wood that they want. But it's a process, and it's all natural. I try to, you know, we color things, we dye stuff. That's for the people. I mean, it definitely is, you know, and it's fun. I've had people tell me, I had one gentleman tell me that his bird would only play with blue toys. Okay, so he only bought blue ones, and I made blue ones for him with just blue on it. But you know, our birds, if it's something they want to manipulate, they're going to do it regardless of what color it is. So
Yeah, definitely worth checking out the Leather Elves on social media or leathereelves.equid.com. Love the birch stuff, especially. My birds love it. I like the natural look, so I'm into the natural look. So that's just me, though.
You don't want any bright pink or blue toys, Jason?
No, I'm good. I'm good with that. I mean, I've always been into natural enrichment. Robin and I have had this talk many times. I like giving birds birds view the world differently than we do, right? They can see a wider spectrum. They see things they see how UV reflects off of branches and leaves and fruits differently than we do. And so I like giving them those natural things over everything just because they view them differently than we do. And they know, and Jordan, I mean, you like you said, with all that natural stuff that you're giving your birds a couple times a week, they know it's coming. They see things that we don't. And so I want to give them those opportunities using natural browse over anything else.
one of my personal pet peeves is the real heavy duty, non-destructible plastic type stuff, because it's so back to the wild. If a bird were out in nature and it was working on something, it wouldn't just keep doing it over and over and over again if it wasn't making any progress. There's
Right.
a purpose to behavior. And so, I wish I had a nickel for every single time someone said to me, my bird destroyed the toy. That's the point.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's the point.
Lisa
And
brought that up earlier.
Yeah, and going back to what you just said, Robin, with the destructible stuff versus the plastic stuff, I found that most of my birds like the stuff that they can rip up, except the Patagonians. They freaking love hard acrylic, bell, anything they can grab and shake the crud out of and make noise. They just love. That's really those kinds of toys I buy mainly just for them. Because everybody else's, they look pretty in the cage, but they don't really get used that much.
You hit the nail on the head though, because they shake it and make noise.
Yeah.
So that's the function of that. It's not about, I'm going to destroy this. It's not about, it's just for that noise, for the sake of the noise. And there are definitely toys that's the purpose, and the PVC elbow you had that's from Wacky Wings. I think, something like that, that's not meant to be destroyed because there's another function to it.
Right.
As long as there's a goal for the enrichment that you're offering, as long as you and it doesn't have to be a specific, he's going to do this 5 times or it's going to be destroyed in 3 days. I want to see him manipulating things with his feet more often. I want to see her, moving around in the cage more often. So I'm going to do something that requires her to hang. Just so that there's a goal to it. It's not just, well, I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to put enrichment.
Yeah.
Because there are those days when, that's all it is. It's, I have to do enrichment today. And maybe it's the last thing on your list, but it shouldn't be. It should be, okay, we're going to work on this. This is, you want to elicit behavior with enrichment. And so you can set a goal that way.
Yeah, and some of the easiest enrichment that's their favorite is simply throwing stuff on top of the cage. Like whole mustard leaves or collard greens, things like that. I just throw them on top of the cage and let them pull them through because they have to hang upside down to get to them, and that's exercise. And so
I do the same
that's
thing
some of the
with fruit.
best stuff. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was
No,
just
that's
saying
okay.
that I do the same thing with fruit. So I'll cut up fruit and I'll just throw it up there and they climb up right up the wire, they hang upside down and they've got to work for it.
Yep. And there's nothing wrong with getting them to work for it. We know that enrichment can involve social behaviors as well. And if they're different species, and even if you have a pet, a tame pet, the rule of thumb is usually like they need their own physical space, like their cage should be their own. But supervised play outside of the cage where they can interact with other birds is great. I have probably 50 or so birds in my walk-in area of different, of probably, I want to say right now, 20 different species, where I have fruit doves and seed-eating doves and the swamp hens, which are duck, and goose down there in the bottom middle picture, who are the bane of my existence and do everything to destroy things that are the most expensive in there as they can. But
Are they the ones eating your lily pads?
Yeah, I put a $40 lily in there in my new pond, and within probably an hour they had it picked down to nothing. So it's never coming back. It's gone. But it was enrichment for them. So whatever. But they interact with themselves between each other. They interact with other birds out there. Sometimes it's positive. Sometimes it's negative. They like to chase the Nicobar's around when they come into their little territory, their little patch of land out there, but that's okay. But yeah, interaction with other species can be very positive as long as you are, know what you're doing and you know your birds well.
Right. Yeah,
And
it's that kind of goes back to the whole thing with people seeing a breeding situation and assuming that they're not getting any kind of enrichment. I mean, I think having a companion, whether it's a mate or a friend outside of the cage. I mean, I have a lot of birds. People always ask me, well, how do you do one-on-one time with all of them? I don't. I don't even try to.
Right.
They come out and they hang out with each other. I mean, I have some
Mhm.
that like a lot of human interaction, but some of them don't really care. They've got stuff to do with other birds.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think when people bring a pet home and they think they need to spend hours and hours with the bird every day, I think you're setting them up for failure. I think that can be really, really negative, because then that expectation is there and they
Right.
become accustomed to that. And, I think that you need to let your bird out of its cage, of course, but you need to be like doing some other things and letting them interact with other things, and they need to live as a bird, and not not be on you all the time. You're setting them up for failure if you're doing that. That's not to say that you shouldn't spend time with your bird, but you should vary it and keep them used to change. That's really, really important.
I mean, I think two things, Jason, from that I want to stress is that works for a single bird as well.
Yes.
If someone has one bird as a pet, they don't have a flock, it's still, you don't want that Velcro bird. You don't want to become that bird's mate. And it's just not, you are down the road, there's going to be a problem. And I would love to be able to say, oh no, it's great, it's wonderful, you've got this great bond. You're going to have a problem if you are the complete focus of your bird's attention. And then when you mentioned varying when you spend time with your birds, a lot of people have very specific, okay, at this time it's out of the cage time, and at this time, and I understand that everybody has, I mean, our lives are all very busy and very, there's stuff going on all the time. But when you set those kind of strict, 5 o'clock is enrichment time and 3 o'clock is, dinner time, whatever it may be. What happens when you get stuck on the freeway? What happens when you don't make it home in time? Now you've got that screaming bird. You've got that bird that, is all agitated for no reason at all, because you've set it up to fail with the schedule. So I think those two things, we just need to keep in mind.
Yeah, because that's not cute. I mean, some people may think, oh, my bird needs me, it's cute. That's not a healthy relationship. That's codependency, and that's really going to be detrimental to that bird in the long run. Keeping them accustomed to change, keeping them, letting them meet new people, things like that. It's just really important that they're used to change and not routine, because that can be really stressful. I know we've talked about breeding already, in that, when birds are in the act of reproducing, like that fills their days, right? A bird sitting on eggs is not bored, trust me, like they're totally happy doing that. But allowing them to be birds and act as birds is important. So breeding is one of probably the most enriching things that they can do. That doesn't mean that you should let your pets breed, because by and large, the rule of thumb is, especially with parrots, once they bond with another bird, the bond with you is usually over and they become aggressive. It's the same with most softbills. My Arasaris, once I pair them with another bird, it doesn't matter how friendly they were, they are vicious. They become velociraptors, testing the fences for weaknesses. They're vicious, but they're awesome parents, and that's what matters. So keeping that in mind, not encouraging breeding behavior unless that's the goal is important.
When you said we all kind of smiled when you said that, breeding is one of the most enriching things they can do. I was consulting years ago at a zoo in the Netherlands, and I remember I went in to do my talk, and I was all ready to do my presentation on enrichment and all these different things they could do. And there was kind of that look of, what is she talking about? And it wasn't a language barrier. And I said, well, and somebody raised their hand and they said, well, why would you do that? And I said, well, because it's enrichment and it's great for them. And and I went on, and he said, but they're breeding, they're enriched. And they lived in a beautiful habitat and they were actively breeding. And that was the goal that was set for them. And I kind of had to take a step back, because it's true. The act of breeding is highly enriching, and it's allowing them to be what they truly are. And, like you said, Jason, we don't want people, just going, oh, well, I'll just let my pets breed. That doesn't have to be. But so if that component isn't there, and you've got, same species birds but that component is not happening, you fill it in these other ways, the other things that we've talked about. You have them foraging more, you have them, doing other things, but you've got to kind of fill that void.
Yeah, that's why I think sometimes there's a disconnect between what people that have pets are seeing when they see a breeder setup, and what some breeders that have never had any pet birds are seeing when they look at a pet setup. And yes, Jordan, sometimes it can be ridiculous. I know what you're thinking, when the cage is so stuffed full of crap that they can't even move. Yeah, then they're going to get tangled up in something, or
Yeah.
I've seen
Well,
it. I've definitely seen it.
Robin missed this earlier before she logged on, but I was telling Jason and Lisa that I actually moved a couple of pairs of birds around to different locations in the yard, because I hadn't had any reproduction in almost 2 years. And I can assure you, it probably wasn't the lack of branches that I was giving them or the food. It was more so that they probably were not feeling so secure in their, where I had them. So I moved them around, in hopes to see what happens. So even moving birds around to different parts, if you're a breeder, to different parts of the yard, that can be a form of enrichment also.
Change keeps coming back to change. Keeping them accustomed to change.
Exactly. Oh, this is a good one.
The weird thing, sunspots maybe, I don't know. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've had people tell me, oh, my bird freaks out if I move the cage. And I'm like, well, okay, are you putting it, what is it, move it someplace different every single day? What does this look like? And, I feel like it's that we sometimes baby our birds. We, create I call it the China doll syndrome, where they're in a cage and we're going to take care of them, and we're going to give them just, I'm going to chop up his food in little pieces, and I'm going to make sure that it's bite size, and he's not going to, I'll make sure the sun's not too much in his eyes during the day. And it's not, we all learn these things. We all learn that our birds need to, there are some pitfalls that they need to experience. You don't want to create those pitfalls, but it happens. And it's not the end of the world if the bird sees a hawk fly by and alarm calls for a little while. Years ago, I did a thing about stress. Is stress enriching? And I had a veterinarian. I was at a zoo, and the zoo vet was at the back of the presentation, and she got a little upset with me. And she told me that, absolutely not. Stress is not enriching. And I said, well, why would you, feel that way? In her case, she was seeing animals that stress would not be good for. This is an animal that's compromised physically or has, you know, a disease process going on. And no, stress is not enriching at that point, but a little bit of stress builds coping skills. And otherwise you've got these birds that are just, like you said, Jason, you've created a situation that's not a healthy one, where the bird, you know, oh, they shouldn't always be what we would term fearful.
Yeah, I just put two birds together, and they're not a pair. They're two females, but just because just to have them able to socialize with each other. In particular, one bird was is an ex-pet, or used to be a pet, and you can tell when a bird has never been around another because they freak out. They want to stay far away at the other end of the flight. You know, as soon as the one bird moves, they freak out. They either flop to the bottom, or they just, you know, they freak out, stuff themselves in a corner. But it sounds cruel, but they need to be able to learn coping skills, as you mentioned, and to socialize, because that stimulates the brain, that stimulates the mind, and that is better than not having any social skills at all, you know, because you do have problems with those birds down the line. They can mutilate themselves, they can pluck themselves, they can scream, you know, constantly. So, you know, I of course, this is all under supervision. I am watching them because I don't want a fight to break out. But yeah, so that's funny that we're talking about this, because I just did this yesterday, and I was watching that bird freak out, and I'm like, oh, here we go. But all is fine.
Well, and we're seeing this with human parents too. You know, they're and having worked with you know, science teachers, I see a lot of this happening, and there's this pervasive sentiment among parents where they're like, well, I can't do that to my kid because I don't want them to hate me. Like, we all hated our parents at some point, but we didn't really hate them. Like, we, you know, it's part of growing up, and, you know, doing something for their own good is better for the long run, so that you're not raising a child that can't cope. And we're seeing that, like, and Robin has worked with people in her former world, right, with social work and that type of thing, where, you know, they're just not well adjusted, and they can't cope with change and survive on their own. And we see people do this with their pets a lot. It's very, very frustrating. And Robin and I were on a panel years ago about anthropomorphism. She knows exactly where this is going. And I brought up how birds do not need fleece-lined tents to sleep in. And I thought there was going to be a riot. I mean, people just were outraged, and they were angry. And, you know, I'm like, really, like, the healthiest thing for a bird is to sleep on a perch like they do in the wild every single night with their feet locked into place. It's better for their foot and leg health, their posture, everything. And I mean, it was ugly. I thought we were going to need security because it was just that bad. But once again,
they haven't allowed us to work together since then.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but but once again, it's that anthropomorphism. You know, we think we want to treat birds like humans because we think that's what they want. It's not what they want. And what's good for them is not, you know, it's not enriching to give them pizza or pasta. Like, stop it. You know, just stop it. What's good for them is to be treated as a bird and respected as a bird. I mean, birds are not these fragile little creatures. They live in the wild, for crying out Pete's sake. You know, like, they're you know, they're they have to live rough and tumble lives out there, and, you know, they can we can treat them like they deserve to be treated, which is as a bird, not a little feathered person.
It is kind of ironic that the same person on Facebook that will be screaming that parrots shouldn't be in homes, that they should only be in the wild, are also the same people that are like, Well, my bird has to have pizza.
Yeah.
My bird has to have a fuzzy tent, and she can't live without this little tutu.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's so true. So, there's lots of ways to add enrichment to your birds' lives. Hopefully we gave you some ideas tonight. What is appropriate in one situation is not necessarily appropriate for another. You know, knowing what your birds do in the wild is really helpful to help craft that enrichment that's biologically appropriate for them. But also experimenting. You know, as a scientist, I love to experiment. I like to experiment with new foods with the birds. I like to experiment with how I present it to the birds. You know, different times of day, offering different types of enrichment. You know, I'm constantly having to experiment with those damn swamp hens because I'm going to put a really expensive tree out there and they're just going to pick on it for some reason, that one only. I swear they look at the price tag and go, okay, this is the one we're going to destroy today.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's always, keeping birds as a scientific experiment that never ends. And we always have to keep thinking about ways to enrich their lives. And so, I feel really lucky that I can work with all of you who are doing this important work with a wide variety of birds, and, you know, giving them the best possible lives that we can.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
And
thank you.
Thank you for inviting me tonight.
No, thank you for being on.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to
Yeah,
I wanted to
yeah.
thank you first. But I always feel enriched when I get to talk to Robin, because there's always something new. She's always thinking of new ideas and new things that birds can interact with that you know, will enrich their lives, because all of our lives are how we can improve the lives of birds everywhere. And it's not that hard. It doesn't have to be that difficult. So
No, and I can say it, since starting this and doing the podcast, I have had a couple people that have reserved some birds from me, and they actually started watching this stuff, and they were, you know, they thanked me, and they were actually very surprised about the stuff that we talk about, because they didn't know any of, you know, any you know, different forms of enrichment, diet and stuff like that. So I think we're definitely on the right track, and this does you know, open people's minds to think outside the box.
Well, questioning the status quo is something that I've always done, and it's upset some people, which, you know, I'm trying to remember what it is, how it's said, but it's something along the lines of, oh, you made an enemy? Well, good, that means you stood up for something, you know.
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
And it's true. I mean, there's people who are threatened by some questioning the myths that are just constantly perpetuated. If one more person says sunflower seeds are unhealthy, I'm going to lose it. Sunflower seeds are not unhealthy. They just shouldn't be the 100% of the diet. But, you know, we talk about those things all the time. And Robin, when am I going to be on your Friday night podcast? Is it May 13th?
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. Jason will be on Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Very appropriate.
Yeah. And where can people find you again?
So that's on the Leather Elves Facebook page. We go live at 7 p.m. Eastern. And so that'll be, Jason and I are going to talk about some fun stuff that we've been discussing with regards to enrichment. And if you follow the Leather Elves, you'll get notification. Like and follow the Leather Elves on Facebook, you'll get notification when we go live, because I know that people have lives and may not always be, you know, aware that that's what time it is. And we can't always remind them. And it's also recorded, so it is available archived on the Leather Elves page. If you're not available, you know, if you get to go out on a Friday night. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody.
Alrighty.
And thank you, Robin, for joining us as our surprise guest. We really appreciate it, and stay tuned for the next episode. We will definitely have another episode on enrichment because it's such a huge topic. But definitely post your questions wherever you're seeing this. Post your questions in the comments so that we can, you know, address some of the things that are on your mind. So thanks,
Yep,
everybody.
sounds good.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.